Over the past decade, and especially over the past 6 months, the Philippine Coast Guard has been at the forefront of fighting for and preserving the Philippine sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. In tandem with the Philippine Navy, it has done its best to protect our Filipino fishermen and at the same time to ensure that we continuously resupply our position there in the Second Thomas Shoal or Ayungin Shoal. Under a new leadership, the Philippine Coast Guard has adopted an assertive or proactive transparency initiative, which has exposed intimidation tactics by other rival claimants, most notably China. In recent months, it has been involved in multiple encounters with Chinese vessels in its efforts to support the Philippines' resupply missions to the Second Thomas Shoal, and also in terms of its support for the Christmas Convoy, when a civil society group wanted to visit the disputed areas in order to show its commitment to helping preserving the Philippine sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. Blessed with thousands of personnel, increasingly expanding over the decades, and also increasingly sophisticated set of vessels, the Philippine Coast Guard is more capable than ever. But challenges ahead are far from trivial. If anything, they're extremely daunting. China has made it clear that it will not tolerate any significant move by the Philippines to fortify its position in the ground, and China has yet to honor its promises of trying to be more peaceful and constructive in the area. Filipino fishermen face harassment from the Scarborough Shoal or Panatag Shoal to all across the West Philippine Sea. And their concerns that China will continue to deploy its maritime militia forces and try to further fortify its position in other contested areas, including in Juan Felipe Reef. So what are the lessons learned by the Philippine Coast Guard over the past year? And what are the challenges and opportunities ahead for the Philippines to fortify its position in the West Philippine Sea? In order to understand the past, present, and especially the future of the Philippine Coast Guard and its role in preserving the Philippine rights in the West Philippine Sea, we have a very special guest today. Tonight, we're having a long conversation with Philippine Coast Guard spokesman for West Philippine Sea, Commodore Jay Tarriela. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Richard, for having me.
Yes, I mean, this is not your first time here on our little show. A lot has happened since we had the conversation in our first season. We discussed a lot about history of Philippine Coast Guard, but the reality is that the past year has been a sort of a history in its own terms. Can you give us your overview, your understanding of what are the highlights over the past year or so, not only in terms of your encounters with China, but also lessons learned from those encounters?
I think for the Philippine Coast Guard, not just for the Philippine Coast Guard, but for our approach in the West Philippine Sea, which has always been, of course, supported by the National Task Force West Philippine Sea, is that our main lesson learned is that the transparency initiative has brought a lot of good results for the national government. I think as what I mentioned during our first interview, Richard, our main objective of the transparency initiative is to make the Filipinos aware of what's really happening in the West Philippine Sea. And with the recent survey that was conducted by Okta Research, Pulse Asia, it has been very evident now that majority of the Filipinos are completely aware of what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. They are, already have enough information that the Chinese aggression are still happening, harassment of the Filipino fishermen are happening. And then the second one that I mentioned as an objective of the Transparency Initiative is for the international community to be aware as well. For them to condemn collectively People's Republic of China every time we have this encounter of dangerous maneuver, water cannoning, and even the first incident that we publicized, the use of military-grade laser. And since last year, since we started this Transparency Initiative, all of this have fallen into places. We have achieved such objective. It's not just the United States as our traditional ally. It's not just Japan or even Australia, but even majority of the European Union and the G7 countries have not just criticized or condemned China, but they have explicitly expressed their support for the armed forces of the Philippines to be modernized. We have a lot of defense cooperations that we have signed in the recent months. And in a nutshell, I think that is the most significant milestone that we had for 2023 as we embark with our approach of transparency and exposing the Chinese aggressive action.
Can we go back to this transparency initiative? I mean, some have called it assertive. I call it proactive transparency initiative. No matter how you want to characterize it, can you give us a little bit of background? How did this come about? Why did this come about more recently? Didn't we have anything such as that before? Was this a policy decision by the top leadership, the commander-in-chief? What are the circumstances of this proactive, assertive transparency initiative?
Well, before I respond to your question, Richard, I think it's also worth mentioning that in our case, we would say that is what we're doing is strategic transparency. We believe that transparency is a very strategic instrument in addressing gray zone activities of China. Now, if the question is how it came about, as I said before, the previous years, before
Right.
President Bongbong Marcos was elected and became the president of this country, there are instances that Filipinos now, during those days, are not receiving any information. We believe that in terms of the public opinion, with the influence of very limited information that the Filipinos are getting, and it appears that the president during that time is becoming, more closer with the People's Republic of China. There came a point that Filipinos are no longer believing with the story that Philippine fishermen are harassed or we're getting trouble in patrolling our own waters in our exclusive economic zone. So when John Eduardo Año became the National Security Advisor late January last year, because before our NSA was
Professor Carlos.
Professor Carlos, and she had her own reason and approach in the strategizing our efforts in the West Philippine Sea. But I don't know. Probably there's another reason why she was replaced by John Eduardo Año. But when John Eduardo Año became the NSA, I can still remember what was how he started the discussion during that first NTF-WPS
Right.
meeting. He said in Filipino language, but I'm going to use this for translate this to English for the benefit of your audience, since I know you have a lot of foreign followers, Richard, about your show. So he said, for the past so many years, before I assumed as the National Security Advisor or the chairman of the National Task Force West Philippine Sea, we became like children. That we are always warned by our parents of you should not go there or should not go that far because there's a monster there.
Right.
And according to him, from the time we started from the time we filed our case in the arbitral ruling up to the 6 years of the former President Duterte, we have become silent about the bullying, the aggressive behavior. It's because during the time President Aquino, when the case was filed, of course, nobody is supposed to say other things because there's an ongoing trial, something like that, right? During the time of President Aquino. And then for President Duterte, there were really no news or any updates about the West Coast.
So you guys were almost like muzzled, if I can. I'm sorry, maybe it's not the best metaphor, but like you cannot say what is happening there, or one of your hands is tied at the back. If I'm going to use a kind of a boxing kind of a metaphor, right? This is more than half a decade, right? We're looking at the arbitration was filed 2030 and all the way towards the end of Duterte. That's 2022, almost a decade.
Almost a decade.
Yeah, that's a very important observation.
No news about
Yes.
what is really happening, unless there are like very alarming incidents.
Like the Reed Bank incident.
Reed Bank
2019,
incident, Julian Felipe Reef
Right.
incident, the swarming, and of course the ramming of FB Jimber in
Right.
a fisherman from Mindoro. So except only those instances that Filipinos are becoming aware. So he said that we need to recalibrate our approach, and he believed that with the right information for the Filipino people, we can be able to ignite patriotism and through patriotism, we can be again united in addressing our efforts in the West Philippine Sea. And from then on, I think the president has also given him a green light with such approach. And the Philippine Coast Guard, I myself became the spokesperson by February of that previous year, and
2023, yeah.
2023. And since then on, it has been rolling and snowballing, and I think we are getting a positive result of our transparency initiative.
Before I go more into this, what Philippine Coast Guard is doing and, way forward, obviously we also had folks from the Armed Forces of the Philippines on this show, and I've been in conversation with folks in the Philippine Navy, among others. Clearly, this is an interagency approach. So you mentioned National Security Advisor Anyo, who also was the former DLG Secretary and former military chief. So you're really looking at different agencies working together. Can you give us a little bit of idea about how important that was and how is it going so far?
Well, for a national security advisor who have that kind of all experiences from
Gravitas
military,
even,
from a bureaucrat in the DILG now, a national security advisor, he is very successful in, addressing all the concerns and issues of all these government agencies. The National Task Force West Philippine Sea is composed of a lot of agencies. You have the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the Philippine Coast Guard, Department of National Defense, Department of Justice, Department of Foreign Affairs, DILG. I mean, almost majority of the departments are attending the National Task Force West Philippine Sea. But the approach of the Transparency Initiative is not something that only conducted by the Philippine Coast Guard. Everything that we release to the public has to be vetted by the Information Working Group. And for the Information Working Group, you have the DFA who would also raise their issue if they have some, and also make some modification or recommended way of writing a press release or something. And you also have the DND, the Armed Forces of the Philippines. So the interagency cooperation and putting also the input of all these agencies have allowed the National Task Force West Philippine Sea to ask each agency to share their take on whatever information that we're going to raise to the public. So it's not just us who carries the burden of the Transparency Initiative, but it's a success story of interagency cooperation.
Yes, so it's a coordinated whole of nation approach.
Yes.
Now, in terms of this, I mean, let's just call it for what is it? It's a way of information warfare because you're up against a country engaging in disinformation. Back in the day, you had a president at the very least who sometimes was accused of even lawyering for the other side. But where did you get this inspiration for this transparency initiative? I mean, in terms of just communication warfare, the most successful democratic case I can think about, outside the Philippines is President Zelensky of Ukraine, right? A very media savvy guy who really took on the Kremlin information machinery, and I think he did pretty good job, at least throughout the first or second year of the war, and essentially has been, telling everyone around, hey, you're going to help us, right? So I'm just wondering, was there kind of a blueprint for you guys in terms of how you approach this? Because there are tactical elements, what kind of, things you're going to expose, how you're going to expose it, the timing, the visuals. I mean, there's almost like a cinematography to some of the things you guys are doing and using advanced technology also. Was there any blueprint or inspiration? Or a course? I mean, maybe you met a director from Hollywood. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it just so happened that every month, we are actually improving our production.
Right. And you're improvising that.
Yeah. But I think it's also very important for us to discuss, Richard, that our transparency initiative is not something that was just thought of in just, a matter of one particular, and out of thin air. We have to remember that China have dominated the entire South China Sea. Primarily only for one good reason. Because among the claimant states, especially here in the Philippines, we basically have allowed them to do that, right? When we say we allow them to do that, of course, during the time President Pinoy, he tried so much legally in a legal approach by the International Tribunal.
Right.
But of course, the issue in 2016 is that who's going to enforce it. So from 2012, when we had the Scarborough Shoal
Show,
standoff, and they didn't leave, and they stayed there until now, and then 2013 onwards, they started their reclamation activities. And of course, originally the United States are expected to do something about it initially, but of course, during that time, their president just somewhat never exerted so much compelling reason for China to not to militarize those reclaimed islands. And then the time of Duterte, from President Duterte from 2016 to 2022, it has emboldened China to do whatever they want. So from 2012 until 2022, basically, nobody has really stood up against China. Their bullying behavior, their illegal action, nobody told him that, hey, what you're doing is really illegal. It's only during the time of President Aquino by filing a case. But in 2016, the issue was who's going to enforce the decision.
Right.
So, despite of that effort, still, nobody really called on the activities of China. So, our approach now is there are two ways. One, are we still going to meet them head on militarily? Of course not.
It's out of question.
Obviously, we do not have such capability to do that. Second is, how are we going to be able to unite a divided nation who's
Right.
going to look at China's aggression as for everybody to wake up and to be patriotic, to do their duty to stand up for this country. And while at the same time, for us to garner international community support. That is only through transparency.
Right.
So this is the reason why the Transparency Initiative was conceptualized. For us to be able to expose the Chinese aggression, for the international community to be united, and for our country to be united as well. To tell the world that, look, we need your help. We need your assistance. Otherwise, this country, China, who remains to be bullied, will just keeps on doing illegal actions, aggressive behavior. We're just going to take over the entire South China Sea and push their own national interest for the 10-dash line that is only based on whatever they thought of.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we have done. We were able to convince all the countries that these are illegal actions with the photos, the videos, and also the media who were embedded in our mission. We became successful in convincing the Filipino people that there is something wrong going on. Right. That as a nation, we need to criticize them. We need to stand up against bullying. And that's what we have been doing. It's very fulfilling for the National Task Force West Philippine Sea and even for the Philippine Coast Guard to know that majority of the Filipinos now care for the West Philippine Sea. Because I've always been mentioning this, Richard. Our fight in the West Philippine Sea is not just a fight for the Philippine Coast Guard, not just a fight for the people in Palawan, not just a fight for the armed forces of the Philippines, but it's a fight for all the Filipinos who still believe that as a country, we are a sovereign state.
For me, I think to be fair about this, even the Americans were caught off guard with China. I mean, look at the response of the Obama administration, not only to the Scarborough Shoal, but to the massive reclamation activities of China beginning December 2013. I mean, they were caught off guard and they were very dismissive towards it. So I think, to be fair to our former presidents, especially to Pinoy, I think everyone, in one way or another, was adjusting because China took the initiative, and I think they were able to hold on to it for quite some time. Now, the thing is, as far as dealing with China is concerned, the gray zone tactics have also been something very difficult operationally and also policy-wise. Like, are we going to risk confrontation by dealing with some of the gray zone tactics? Very quickly, for the purpose of our audience who may not be into our kind of a lingo, what are gray zone tactics, and are we seeing an evolution in China's gray zone tactics? Because a part of me thinks that China is somewhere between gray zone now and kinetic, right? I mean, because gray zone is supposed to be gray, but the shades of the gray can be darker and darker towards kinetic. So I think it is getting darker and darker and going towards kinetic. And the thing is, I want to also get your thought on this, because it seems China is extra aggressive towards the Philippines. The Vietnamese have been militarizing their islands there. We know that. We have satellite imagery from AMTI, among others. The Malaysians, the West Capella, the Petronas excavations, they did that in defiance of China. But it looks like China is very aggressive towards the Philippines. I mean, we're just doing the usual RORE and resupply mission we have been doing to Ayungin Shoal since 1998, 1999. But first, can we talk about this gray zone and what is your read on why China is so aggressive about it? Is it because of your transparency initiative? Did you poke the dragon?
Well, first of all, Richard, when we talk about the Chinese gray zone activities, I think it's very important for us to understand that the main agents of Chinese maritime gray zone in the West Philippine Sea is that they're pretty much reliant on those two agencies.
Coast Guard and
The first
Malaysia,
one is, of course, the Chinese Coast Guard.
Yeah.
They are painted white. It appears that they're just doing law enforcement.
Civilian.
But of course, they're also pretending to be just civilian, not gray ship that would provoke or escalate tension to a kinetic warfare. And then the second one is the Chinese Maritime Militia that pretends to be an ordinary fisherman. These are the two agencies that been carrying out that gray zone activities, whether through aggression that you cannot say that they are pushing the envelope for kinetic warfare because they are just white ships and they're just doing law enforcement. The same thing with Chinese Maritime Militia. You cannot just say that they are occupying unoccupied reef in the West Philippine Sea because they would just simply ignore it, saying, these are just ordinary fishing vessels sheltering. So that's how good they were in
camouflaging
their gray zone activity. Now the question is our transparency initiative really was poking the bear that they are becoming more, overly aggressive towards us in response of our transparency? Well, Richard, what we have been publishing, what we have been documenting for the past months had been happening in the West Philippine Sea before.
Yeah.
The only difference why we're talking about this, it's because we publicize it. We cannot really know what is happening in Vietnam and even in Malaysia. It's because they're not sharing or publicizing the actual aggression of the Chinese Coast Guard or even the swarming of the Chinese Maritime Militia. So, as to the threshold, the level of aggression, I think the aggression of not being, having the strategic transparency and telling it to the world is pretty much the same.
Well, I just want to make clear that I was not blaming you guys for doing your job because we see a lot of gaslighting. Oh, Philippines, why are you asserting yourself? Why are you showing the bad side of our neighbor? How dare you? But on that point, are we setting a new gold standard for our neighbors? Do you think that now it's going to put pressure on Malaysia and Vietnam to do something similar? Because people in Vietnam and Malaysia are going to look like, hey, look at the Filipinos. Why are they doing? We also have decent ships. Why can't we also do this to China, right? Because in both countries, anger is also rising against China. Well, Vietnamese don't need that. But even in Malaysia, I noticed, despite the, some accommodationist factions in power, if you talk to a lot of ordinary Malaysians, including Chinese Malaysian friends of mine, they're also very critical of what's happening there in Malaysia. What do you think about that? Do you think you're putting pressure on others? And that's why China is worried. Like, oh my God, these Filipinos, they're setting a new standards. Maybe others are going to learn from them.
Well, Richard, because of the academic network that we have friends from Malaysia, we have friends from Vietnam, we also have Indonesian friends. And I agree with you. These are the common conversation that I also have with these people from Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. They were saying, we are also experiencing the same.
Right.
For Malaysian, for Indonesian, even Vietnamese, the same level of aggressive behavior, the shadowing, the water cannoning, the harassment of their respective fishermen. So it also make them ask themselves, if the Philippines can do that,
why shouldn't we?
Why aren't we doing this thing? And every time I tell them that our main objective is for our own people to be aware of what's really happening, for us to be united as a nation, to identify China really as the aggressor. It also told them, our story also make them understand that this is a very effective approach for them to unite their own countries. And they are also now thinking like, why aren't we doing that? Why our government from Vietnam, Malaysia, and also Indonesia is not also doing that? There came a point that I had this joke among our,
Network, yeah.
Southeast Asian friends
Yeah.
that, if ever they're going to leave the embedding of foreign nationals who are journalists, I would be willing to embed Malaysian journalists,
Right.
Indonesian journalists, Vietnamese journalists,
Interesting.
and then for them to join the operation and see for themselves what's really happening in the West Philippine Sea, and then publish it or show it to their own
People, yeah.
people.
Yeah.
I think it will have a very big impact, considering that, hey, these are not just produced news by Filipinos,
Yeah.
but these were actually experienced by our own media personalities.
And it resonates more
And it
in that
resonates
case. Yeah,
more.
yeah.
So, I agree with you, Richard. If that would even happen,
Interesting.
we can be able
Very
to
interesting.
at least influence and lead the charge for transparency, to tell the Malaysians, Indonesians, and Vietnamese that, you owe this to your own people.
And how do you feel about the ASEAN statement towards the end of the year, whereby, because I've been, poking ASEAN and saying, hey, maybe you want to say something. In fairness, towards the end, I think
They
kudos
did.
to Indonesia. They said our common maritime sphere, which I think in a way is an implicit rejection of China treating it as like their own lake, right? If you look at the 9-dash line, it's like 85% of those waters. So far that it's hitting into Indonesia's North Natuna Sea. How important that was, that kind of statement from ASEAN?
Well, for Indonesia, which is
The big brother of ASEAN, yeah.
the big brother of ASEAN, and basically now boasting itself as part of the G20 among ASEAN countries, is
Sure.
that it's really a big thing that Indonesia being the chair now of ASEAN, having that kind of statement. It really gives a different message for China, that ASEAN now is probably waking up because of this transparency that we have been pushing.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about your own experience as a spokesman. And being a spokesman is probably not one of the easiest jobs out there. But since you have started this transparency initiative, it looks like you're attracting a lot of interesting attention. And I noticed online, not that I'm a paragon of behaving myself online.
I actually admire you. You
I've been doing this for quite some time. Yeah,
You
yeah.
respond to all the comments.
I do. I'm a very patient teacher. I mean, I think that's the thing. You're very patient, and sometimes I laugh at myself, like, why are you doing it? But I just feel it's important. You set the standard, right? Like, no, never feel you're too good for others. Go down dirty sometimes. But I think it is important that part of the transparency initiative is also being active on social media, sharing information. I mean, we share your videos and information when we want to also share information about this. But the thing is, of course, the downside to that is you have a big target on you're in the crosshair of many people, common friends in that sense throughout the years. And I'm not saying that I'm happy that I'm not alone, but what I'm saying is, I mean, how are you coping with this? Because it's sometimes crazy, the level of attacks you're getting. I mean, in my case, I asked for it, but in your case, you're just doing your job.
Well, that's true. During the first early weeks of my assumption as the spokesperson,
Right.
it is really depressing. Reading comments in
Yes.
Twitter or X, or
They can get
in
mean,
social
very mean,
media. It's
yeah.
like, these people, I don't even know you.
Yeah,
I was just
exactly.
telling the Filipino people that
Yeah.
this incident happened, and you're going to be judged from whatever
Yeah.
stupid things that they can
Yeah,
think.
ad hominem attacks.
Ad hominem
yeah,
attack,
horrible, yeah.
like, you're pro-US,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
CIA,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever. It's really...
They're gonna pick your pictures. You gave some random talk in the country. Oh, you're paid by
Yeah.
like the most nonsensical stuff out
you
there.
are a tainted soul or something
yeah,
like that.
exactly.
But I get over it. Like, I just think that, I'm not doing anything wrong. And I also began to understand that we must be doing something right for
Right.
China to support an information operation.
So you see it that way. You
Yeah.
think this is not just organic. I mean, of course, there's some people who have certain opinions, right? But it looks a bit organized sometimes. Like the talking points are like, I saw this I saw also this
Yeah.
one, like,
I
right?
remember one time, I think twice already.
Yeah.
That there were posting from X that it's exactly copied and
Yeah,
posted
copy-pasted,
at
yeah,
the
yeah.
same time, like only a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
So I think this is really part of the information operation of China for us to not to succeed in our transparency initiative.
To muddy the water, create a
Um,
mist.
and
Yeah.
For me, I think they have this two ways to discredit our messaging. The first one, of course, is that they always provide an alternative story of what we have been telling the public. For example, if it's a collision or a water cannon, they would say they didn't do that. It's the other way around. Where the reason why there was a collision, it is us who did not abide with the international regulation for prevention collision, something like that. So that's the first approach that they do. The second one is actually the most painful part.
Yes.
They shoot the messenger.
Yeah.
They're going to discredit you, to tell you that to tell the people that you're just lying or just made up stories. Your sources are
Or you're
open.
crybaby. I've seen this horrible
Or you're
cartoons of
crybaby.
you guys crying, oh, you're just hit by a water cannon. Of course, the other side said, let's water cannon you and see how you're going to feel about it, right? Like, that's just water. It's nothing. Diba? Like, I've seen that. And
Yeah.
some of these people are Filipinos. I mean, and some of them claim to be patriotic Filipinos, and they're I mean, I always say, good luck doing that in Vietnam or in China, or actually for any decent, self-respecting democracies. I mean, it takes some level of imagination or leap for you to blame your own. I call it strategic gaslighting. I mean, that must be painful, right? Like, duh. I mean, this is the Philippine position, and it's based on facts, right?
You know what, Richard? I already stopped reading comments.
Yeah.
Next.
You should once in a while. And then you respond once in a while. Because I notice it brings them back. Like, who knows? Maybe Richard tonight is in the mood to respond to me at 2 a.m., right? I play that game because for me, it's very important to mainstream these issues. It's a gut issue, but because a lot of people talk about it in a policy wonky way, I think people, but when you do a little bit of what I call bardagulan, right, it makes it more relatable. And in the end, you know it. Every Filipino down deep in their hearts know may mali talaga nangyari dyan, which is you guys have been exposing. And no matter how some sides want to
I think
spin
it was
yeah.
only one posting that I screen cap and then have it posted recently.
Right.
That it's because it's infuriating.
Yes.
Like
yes.
the one who experienced the harassment are Filipino fishermen. If you're really a concerned Filipino, if you're really a patriotic Filipino, I cannot really understand that you have to embrace the narrative of the Chinese
Yeah.
Coast Guard and post
Over
it in
your
your
own
wall
people,
saying
yeah.
that it's not the way that it happened. So it's very infuriating that I need to respond to one of those fake news or disinformation.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, Richard, I think it's very difficult for me as well as a public official
Right.
to respond and to do bardagu.
Okay, yeah.
To,
No, but okay, there are ways to do it, right? There are ways like, just in your face facts. And then, don't think, I mean, I try to avoid ad hominem as much as possible because, I'm also teaching in a public university. I'm a journalist. What I mean is like, you can be a little bit humorous, you can be witty and tease around it, but I think you have done a pretty good job. And I noticed there are times that you were very fair in response, and then they'll take it out of context. So sometimes they say, less talk, fewer mistakes. But do you also feel that perhaps this is a part where your patriotism is going to be tested, and where you're going to realize whether you're, right? I mean, it's easy to be patriotic if there's no price to pay. That's why you don't have to respond to this. I go eye roll when I see some politicians who are totally quiet during the Duterte years, suddenly now going West Philippine Sea. And I was like, where were you all those years, right? I mean, so because there's now this is the position of the administration.
I'll be
So-
drinking water.
Yeah, exactly. You just do that. So for me, I want to feel like personally, did you feel that this is where the metal of your patriotism is tested? And now, a year into your spokesmanship, you feel even more Filipino, more patriot. Is there that kind of because I think that's one coping mechanism, right? And a way of maturing as a public official. Yeah.
Well, my kids already. I think my eldest child, she's already 15 years old, and she also checks my social media. Every time that she notices comments that are somewhat really annoying,
Yeah.
not actually just disappointing, but really annoying.
Exactly.
She's the one who's going to tell me like, Dad, you're doing a terrific job,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
and it's for the Filipino people. You just have to ignore this kind of posting because they're paid to do that. In your case, you're doing this because you are concerned for this country.
Or you're exposing folly and misinformation. I mean, for me, there are people that are gonna have weird ideas. I'm just gonna put it that way. It doesn't have to be paid or influence and all. And I think some people are not comfortable with being exposed for because some people have an ideological stance on it, right? They hate US. Philippines is an ally of US, so automatically that means China is the good one for them or something like that. We have those kind of weird ideas, but I'm not gonna go deeper because you're gonna drink more water if I do that. Let's go to the last part of this discussion. In a previous episode, we had a discussion with folks from the Armed Forces of the Philippines. We discussed about AFP modernization and all. Let's talk about Coast Guard, Philippine Coast Guard. I've had the privilege of, boarding some of your vessels. Pretty modern, pretty cool, pretty big. And in fact, one of our guests, Professor Daniel, he mentioned that, if you look at the Philippine Coast Guard, it is one of the leading coast guards, at least in the ASEAN region, if not the leading. What is your take on that? And moving forward, if the AFP wants to be a kind of a world-class armed forces of the 21st century for a mid-sized country, what is the goal here for the Philippine Coast Guard, and how are you moving in that direction?
For the Philippine Coast Guard, of course, the first thing that you can really notice now is that since the time of President Aquino until the continuity of President Duterte's support for the modernization of the Philippine Coast Guard, we have been acquiring more vessels now, and with the support of the Japanese government. And for this administration, for President Bongbong Marcos, we're going to acquire now 5 more 97-meter vessels.
Right.
So these are offshore patrol vessels, pretty much larger. We can be able to sustain longer at sea in patrolling West Philippine Sea. As to the development of MDA, the Maritime Domain Awareness, we have received so much support from the United States, from the European Union, and even for Canada. The dark
Yes,
vessel detection
Canada, yeah.
capability. Their satellite has allowed us to have a much more extensive MDA capability. Also for the number of personnel for the Philippine Coast Guard. Until now, the Department of Budget and Management still supports the expansion of the Philippine Coast Guard to reach 37,869. Last year, we were able to recruit 4,000. The other year, also 5,800. So if we're going to totally add up the number of personnel that was added to the Philippine Coast Guard during the time of President Marcos, we have added more than 10,000 personnel. And then for this year alone, they're going to add additional recruitment of 4,000. So that would already be like 14,000.
Right.
We are lucky right now that the President and the Senate and the Congress are very supportive of the Philippine Coast Guard's modernization. There are budgets now allocated for additional aircraft and also additional vessels.
What are the certain gaps? Well, we don't want to give away too much, but what are the certain areas where you think the Philippine Coast Guard can improve significantly, and what are the areas you're most proud of over the past decade in terms of how far we have come compared to what we had back in the day?
Well, the Coast Guard before a decade before, our main focus is only about maritime safety, marine environmental protection, and Coast Guard, because with the very limited number of vessels, we're pretty much focused on pre-departure inspection. This is the only way that the Coast Guard has always been placed as headliner. Like
Right.
Coast Guard allowed a vessel with excessive number of passengers, right?
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right.
Most
you're
of the
right,
time,
yeah,
Coast
yeah.
Guard are only remembered because of that. Like Coast Guard allowed a vessel to sail despite of typhoon warning, something like that. Our focus and the appreciation of the public before is only about maritime safety. And at some point, sometimes marine environmental protection if there's oil spill. So if there's no oil spill, people won't recognize also
Yeah.
Coast Guard that marine environmental protection is really a function of the Coast Guard. But moving forward, since the time of President Pinoy and then Duterte and then now President Bongbong Marcos, with the number of vessels that we have, we were able to have a much more clear, diverse functions. For example, in countering piracy in Sulawesi, in supporting also narcotics trafficking at sea, even smuggling, and of course, not to mention, of course, the most important part is our being the primary option in maintaining our presence in the West Philippine Sea.
And at the same time, as an archipelagic country, we have the Bashi Channel, we have the Philippine Sea, huge areas. Are those areas that Philippine Coast Guard perhaps could also have more presence in? Because I think we're so concentrated on the other side, right? Towards the west, towards Malaysia, West Philippine Sea, etc. But it should be a kind of a 360 degrees kind of presence, right?
Well, for the Coast Guard, we have very limited number of vessels, as I've always been mentioning.
Yeah.
Although the national government now is supporting for acquisition of more vessels. But despite of that limited number of vessels, we can still be able to have rotational deployment
Right.
up north in Batanes
Yeah.
and also in Benham Rise. But again, these are very limited. It's not 24/7, but at least with the rotational deployment that we have, we can be able to optimize the limited number of vessels to say
Right.
that the 360, although it's not 24/7, we still have present at some point in time.
Medyo intermittent.
Yes.
But you want to go a little bit more than intermittent. Last point, what are we going to expect for this year? In terms of raw emissions, in terms of transparency initiative, what should the Filipino people look forward to in terms of the commitments of the Philippine Coast Guard based on what you have already experienced and based on your policy commitments? Yeah.
For their supply, I won't comment on that, Richard.
Yeah,
That's
of
Armed
course.
Forces of the Philippines. But of course, the only role of the Philippine Coast Guard is to make sure that we're going to support them all the way, regardless, however, whatever they want it to be conducted or what means necessary for the Coast Guard to support the AFP mission for their supply. Our Commandant, Admiral Ron Hill Gaban, has been very supportive to the Armed Forces of the Philippines. As to how can we be able to support them, it's always been approved by the Commandant. For the expectation of the Coast Guard in the Transparency Initiative, as I said, we have gained so much accomplishments.
Yeah.
We have met our strategic objectives because of our transparency for the past months. We had a lot of defense cooperation that was signed because of the international community being aware of the transparency. So I think we still need to continue what we're doing to have a much more better production of
Right.
the drones, for example, if ever those harassment will still be ongoing. But at the same time, I think it's also worth mentioning that the harassment of the Chinese with the Filipino fishermen recently, you can now expect that the ordinary Filipino fishermen also now believes on documenting the aggressive
Right.
actions of China. So it is not just the
Using
Philippine
Chinese
Coast Guard.
phones sometimes.
Yeah.
Affordable Chinese phones.
So it's not just us who's
Yeah.
going to document
Yeah.
them, to expose it to the world, but local Filipino fishermen also believes in our transparency initiative now. And that is something that I'm very thankful and fulfilled for, knowing that the Filipino fishermen are, really appreciates what we're doing. So I think
I want to ask one more thing because some of my colleagues here were involved in this. The Christmas Convoy. Can you quickly tell us what really happened there? Because you didn't call me out, but you clarified when I raised question about what happened there. And I know this is a policy question; it's complicated. But in the future, do you expect there'll be efforts like that by the civil society to also contribute to protection and preservation of our sovereign rights to the degree that you can share? Because I know this is a policy question. It's much more complicated than people see. First of all, what happened with the Christmas Convoy situation? And what are you expecting down the road? Because some of my colleagues were involved.
Well, first of all, for the Christmas Convoy, Initially, we had the chance to talk to them where the places that we
Right.
even agreed upon what will be the route of
Right.
the convoy, and the organizers have also approved of our proposal. The commitment of the Philippine Coast Guard, as approved by the National Task Force, is that our 97-meter vessel, the largest Coast Guard vessel, will be the lead vessel to protect the Christmas convoy. In this case, it was Kapitan Oka, right? But when the master of the Kapitan Oka monitored the Chinese Coast Guard will be proceeding on the direction to cut the convoy, he decided to have a U-turn.
There was a warship too, right? I was told Chinese warships were like
There were some warship, but it's pretty much distant. It was only the Chinese Coast Guard that really crossed that is about to proceed to cross the convoy. And when he monitored that there's a Chinese Coast Guard about to cross the convoy, he decided to have a U-turn. The Philippine Coast Guard vessel keeps on calling him that, if you're going to do a U-turn, the Chinese Coast Guard and the warships that we pass through will still be there. We might as well just finish this
Yes.
convoy.
Panindigan natin to.
Yeah, panindigan natin to. But he still decided to U-turn and then go back to El Nido. If your question is, does the Philippine Coast Guard support the civil society? Well,
With, of course, safety and protocols and all of the considerations. Yeah.
I think the National Task Force West Philippine Sea, Jean Año has already expressed his statement here that we really welcome the civil society in support of our
Constructively, yeah.
for giving away groceries, foods to our soldiers in different stations in the West Philippine Sea. So we support it, but they really have to coordinate it with the Armed Forces of the Philippines
Yes.
and the Philippine Coast Guard in the interest of their own safety.
Yes.
To make sure that they're not going to pass through areas that were already occupied or reclaimed by
or give excuse to
Chinese.
the other side to do something
Yes.
fake version of their civil society. Because
That's true.
we are a real democracy. Unfortunately, we're among few real democracies in this part of the world. Thank you very much for that, Commodore Tarriela.
Richard,
I
thank
wanted
you
to
very
ask
much.
more questions, but I said, I'm going to put you into trouble. No, but we want to have you back. So I think we have covered a lot. So thank you so much for your sincere and there were the water drinking parts, but but very forthcoming conversations. Thank you very much, Commodore.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. I'm Richard Hidarian, and that was The View from Manila. We're One News, all sides, all the time.